Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for this invitation, and also congratulations for this great meeting that puts together so many ideas, projects, and desires and intentions for the future. And I think that what Douglas Hickey has said to us is a case in point. He looks at Italy with this positive attitude and looking to the future, our future, so positively. Thank you. In fact, this is one of the most important aspects of this government, and that is to build the confidence in the extraordinary potential that our country has. Very often things aren't done because we don't have that positive attitude, and this positive attitude is something that we want to put forward, and this sort of meeting helps in this direction. Now, the government's attitude to this problem, which is, of course, of great concern, especially we see the statistics boards in statistics that says that 37% of young people are still looking for a job. And therefore, we feel the responsibility to not leave things as they stand. And in order to look at this issue, several things have been put in place. What you recalled is a general measure, the program, in other words, to reduce the government, the companies, I beg your pardon, contribution if they take on people, young people, on a permanent basis, the so-called Jobs Act. And this involved 450,000 young people who were taken on because of this measure, and that is very important. Also because permanent job contracts were underlined and put to the fore. In other words, companies were encouraged not to take on people on a contract basis because they cost less, and the measure made less expensive taking on a young person on a permanent basis, giving, of course, a greater sense of stability and sense of having a prospects on the part of the young people. People, in fact, can take on a whole new lease of life if they have a permanent contract like this. And I think that this was one of the key aspects that has characterized our government's policy. Will this growth, in fact, wane? No, I don't think so, because companies look to incentives. They look to incentives because it helps them in their investment, certainly. But the incentives, I don't think, are the all-important aspect. The all-important aspect is the investment that is put in. And from 2013 to 15, foreign investment, FDI, in Italy have multiplied by sevenfold. And that's key, because if you invest, you create wealth, you create opportunities, you create jobs. Now, the incentives that are given are to facilitate companies to take up these opportunities of investment. They don't replace investment, in other words. And investment, of course, is always a risk. And it's a risk that you bet, if you like, that you take on the future. And we want to encourage that confidence so that people don't just keep their wealth and get profit from it from an interest point of view, but they put their money into particular investments and programs. And we've heard from the Estonian ministry and minister how much, in fact, the digital program has changed their lives. Mr. Renzi has talked about the broadband and what's going to be done. Unfortunately, we're lagging very far behind here. But the program is worth 12 billion euros, and it is a private and public investment venture, and will put money in places of the country where the market is still lagging behind. And in fact, 10% more penetration of the broadband is equal to 1 GDP point. So that is all important to the growth of our economy and the growth of our companies. Now, the second measure that the government has used is the so-called Young Guarantee Program. There are many aspects to this program which focuses on young people. I'd like to talk about three. First of all, 1 million young people have in fact enrolled in this website portal, and that means that they're going to do something. They're not just not waiting for a job to fall into their lap. And despite all the limits and difficulties, the system of the private employment agencies have in fact met 2/3 of the people who have enrolled, and 1/3 of these young people have received an opportunity for training, a sort of first apprentice's job or whatever. In other words, a process has got going. The results still are unsatisfactory, if you like. Let's say they're not yet satisfactory, but you've got to start somewhere, and I think that there has been a change, and the change has been positive. The third measure is that part and parcel of this program, 2 other measures have got off the ground, which are interesting. The first is so-called Growing in Digital, and together with Google and Union Camere, the Chamber of Commerce Union, it's a training process in digital expertise, because we have seen that many Italian SMEs don't know how to really go digital and use the digital opportunity. So there are 50,000 people, young people, that are going on these courses. There are about 2,000 already actually doing this, and it's an opportunity for growth. And the Minister Poletti said in the last few days that these will become the evangelists of digital. In other words, they will go out and spread the word of digital. And the other important program is called Growing Entrepreneurs. In other words, this too is a program done with the Chamber of Commerce's, and the aim is to develop entrepreneurship among young people who want to start a new company. And there's a fund to help them for 7 years. It's not just a lump sum. It's, if you like, a very easy credit terms. It's not just a handout. It's very easy credit terms that would be given for 7 years to these young entrepreneurs to help them start up a new company. Under Secretary, these measures, are they emergency measures or are they really structural measures? Because one of the questions that are always asked when you face a crisis period like this is that you have factors which come in and which seem to be structural, because still we have a structural situation which seems to be low growth. And therefore, what we ask is, should we have to learn to live with a whole series of unstable factors within our economy because other factors have come into being, and there are new players, new countries? I mean, it's much more complicated than it was before. So do we have to get used to living in an unstable situation? And the measures that have been brought in, are they emergency measures or will they become structural measures for our country? They must become structural measures, is the answer, because we have to develop that ecosystem that Mr. Eheke talked about. It mustn't just be a one-off measure. They must become structural. You have to have a favorable environment so that companies and entrepreneurs take the risk and invest so that they can look to the future with positive expectations. So, as I say, they must become structural. Our minister has asked that the guarantee program that we have set up become structural and become permanent, that people that come out of school do have somebody that, if you like, can take them by the hand, can train them, can push them in the right direction, and not just leave them alone to face a labor market which is increasingly complicated. The measure to reduce the company's contribution if they take on young people, this must too become structural and must lower the indirect costs of labor, which are costs which are very high in Italy compared to the average of other countries. And that's something that weighs heavily on the general costs that companies have. And then the measures that have to do with the ability to generate new entrepreneurs and new companies. And Italy, indeed, has, as part of its DNA, the ability to innovate. And again, the measures must become structural to help the renewal of the entrepreneur companies. 5,460 odd innovative startups have been the result of this measure. And we have a fund which is dedicated to the social cooperatives and companies. Now, you say this at San Patrignano. And we have a rotating fund, and a specific fund of 200 millions have been set aside dedicated to social cooperatives and companies. And we are redesigning the law on social companies to help those companies that decide to become companies, even if they are really non-profit companies and have a social purpose especially. And there are lots of those companies which really do need social innovators. Very often we put the accent on technological innovation, but many of the needs which have not been answered today are, and which require a response from the market, are companies that, in fact, are in the business of social innovation. There's a great need for that today. And Minister Paduan said, in fact, yesterday, that the law reforming the third sector is key. The third sector for the government, he said, is not something that you do, at the end of the day if you've got some energy left. It's a strategic part of the changes that we have to bring into this country. Thank you very much, and Secretary.